All right, welcome everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Flare Factor. Today we'll be talking with Darren from Enosys. And Darren, would you like to introduce yourself a little to those who don't know you?
Sure. Yeah. I'm Darren, also known as Thanasimos. I'm the project manager at Enosys Global. Um, Enosys Global is a software development group. We do a lot of various things, but one of the things that we do is the the Enosys DeFi product suite that we run on Songbird and Flare. We also have some products up on the XDC network and on Ethereum. Um, but we also do some other software development and white label product stuff for groups like Bybit and Red Bull Racing. And we've worked with some other artists doing work into bringing physical NFTs to life and having end-to-end encryption for the redemption of physical NFTs and things like that. So we've been branching out, and we do a lot of software projects, but the ones that most people are going to be interested in here on this podcast are the things that we build on Flare and on Songbird.
All right, thank you. Yeah, you've been around for a while, so introducing yourself was maybe not even necessary, but who knows? Maybe we have some new people to Flare. Before we start, just a few small updates. I know some people have been asking where do we stake our Flare, and then we just said 50 plus nodes. But of course, trying to figure out on the P chain where that goes is beyond most people, and at least beyond the time that most people want to spend doing that. So now actually we have the possibility underneath the stake or buy-in button, depending on the period. There is a link where if you click on that, you'll get the complete list, and it also shows the amount of Flare that is in every node. So that's one thing. Another interesting thing by Raindex is a strategy that buys S-Flare and then unstakes it and then buys it again, which helps with the arbitrage on the network. So that's has been pretty useful. And I know that there are several people using that at the moment. And I think everybody knows by now, but I've said it quite a lot lately. We've finally figured out how to get a sort of stable APY visible, because it tended to go up and then drop after rewards came in, which is quite extreme when you're using the P chain. And now it's hovering around 42%. So definitely nice. All right, let's continue to what people actually came here for, and that's our discussion with Darren. So Darren, tell us a little bit about your ideas on the future of Flare and how Enosys and possibly other products that you have in mind fit into that. I'm really curious.
Sure. So yeah, I mean we've been building on Songbird and Flare since the very beginning. It's a kind of nascent chain, I would think. There's not as much activity as you see on some of the more hyped up chains, but there's been a lot of just kind of work going on in the background, laying the foundations, which is something I've talked about for years now, about just laying down the foundations of technology needed so that when those major use cases come along that really make the network itself relevant as a piece of tech, that it has something to build off of. And so that's what we've been mostly focused on, was just building out some of that essential pieces of the DeFi system, so that when liquidity comes, when there's market activity, there's somewhere for that activity to take place. There's something for that to build off of. And so that those that have come to the network early, that are waiting on those things to show up and really give the network relevance, that they've got somewhere to be and somewhere to start learning kind of the fundamentals of how to do DeFi. DeFi is obviously not for everyone. I think everyone kind of thinks it is. They think it's something that they should all be doing. That's not necessarily the case. DeFi fundamentally is trying to replace very complex financial systems that exist in the traditional finance world with something that it has the appearance of simplicity. But one of the effects of doing that is that you remove a lot of the guardrails and systems that are in place in traditional finance. And so it's a risky thing to get into some DeFi protocols and some systems if you don't understand how they work, if you don't understand what's happening when you push buttons, if you don't know how to kind of inspect the underlying systems that are there. And people get themselves in trouble with that a lot. But one of the tenets of DeFi is to have it be decentralized means you can't have those guardrails in place. It means you can't block people out from access to them. That's the whole point, is that you're not blocked out, that you're not having to prove some level of knowledge in order to get access. But we always try to encourage people to test the waters first, to start small. We run most of the suite on the Costin test network. We run the entire suite on the Songbird Canary network, and then we run parts of it on Flare. And those things are there so that you have it's there first off so that we have a development funnel to run things on a test net, and then a Canary network for network testing and for market testing, and then onto Flare, but also so that users have the ability to do the same sort of thing, so that they can go in and see what buttons do when they push them on a test net with no value, and then see how those same things work with an actual, live money market on Songbird, and then decide how much value they want to put into those things on Flare, and sort of increase how much buy into the system that they have as they increase their knowledge of how these things work. But I mean, people like to jump into things with both feet, especially if they think there's, a profit potential there.
Yeah.
Because obviously if there's a big profit potential, then putting in more money means an even more, large profit potential. Unfortunately, ignoring most of the time the downside risk of the larger your stake in that is, the larger the risk of losses as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm one of those people who went in like, $100 at the time, at first, like, just buy Bitcoin for $100. Oh, it's going up. Okay, maybe I can add another 100, but like really slow. And then I know people who just like, at some point just decided to take all their savings and dump them straight in. And then of course, when the bear hits, you're like, oh no, what have I done? And
yeah, especially when you start messing with things like leverage, where it's no longer like, oh, I might have some losses, but no, you might actually go to zero. Like when you start messing with leverage, when you start messing with options and things like that, you leave the realm of having an underlying that might depreciate to having an underlying that can go to zero, and you actually end up, potentially in negative if you're on margin. So people like to play those games. I personally don't. I personally hate leverage. I kind of hate that it exists in a lot of these systems, especially in DeFi systems, because they tend to spiral. And with there being lots of different ways for other systems to be built on top of leverage, then you end up with all of this other exposure and contagion risk. which leads to big spikes and big crashes, which can be great if you like to play volatility, but it's usually not so great for stable systems. Yeah.
Yeah, most people get really nervous, and I think that just enhances the effect, obviously, of any thing that could have been a small drop suddenly becomes a run for the bottom.
Yeah,
it's a waste. But I mean, I understand it. There's a lot of emotion in there, so definitely. So, what are your hopes for the future of Flare?
Well, I think we're making good progress with bringing new liquidity on chain. I think you guys with SFlare have helped with some of that, giving people a safer place to dip their toes into doing something other than wrapping and delegating, or maybe trying staking. I think SFlare is probably a first touch on having derivatives and things like that for a lot of people, and that's an interesting thing for them to get started with. Personally, I like that it makes the math easy for people if they've paid attention to the fact that one SFlare is now worth 1.172 Flare.
Yeah, it will change today, actually. So.
Yeah, and that is effectively a measure of the network inflation that's really easy to track, because inflation for the network is hard to track because there's a lot of ways it comes out. But the SFlare rate to Flare is an inflation measure for staking and Flare drops. It doesn't catch the delegation piece, so there's that on top of it. But when looking at things like token prices, you have to take into account the growth in token supply that's happened over time as well. And so the market cap obviously is going to look different based on price over time if there's large inflation. And SFlare helps to have a good measure of that and a good tracker of where the network's going as far as the inflation rates. That's really easy to do the math on. So I definitely do like that. As far as where the network's going, I mean, obviously we're all kind of waiting on F-assets to launch. There's been a lot of work going on in the background. I know people don't see it, but there's constant testing, like usually once, sometimes twice a week. There are test scenarios being run. There's a lot going on there. We're getting closer and closer. Obviously, with the USDX listing starting, that means we should be able to have an FTSO price feed up soon, which means that'll be ready to test on Songbird. Again, I advise people that if they want to get some experience with F-assets, dip your toes in. Don't go, pull your life savings worth of XRP that you've been holding since 2017 and throw that onto Songbird and start trading it. There's going to be limits. There's going to be caps. There's going to be things like that are going to cause market dynamics to be a little odd, I think, because there's going to be this rush to get in first. And that rush to get in first, if you can manage to bridge some through the F-asset system, great. If people start going crazy and buying on the market once it's indexes and stuff, because they want access to that initial reward yield, things like that. Yep. I would just suggest people do the math, try to do the math as well as they can to see if overpaying for a bridged asset in order to try to get yield on that asset is going to be the best play in the long run. Because that tends to be the case, is that if there's a limit to how much can come onto a network, it makes arbitrage difficult. So the price is going to go up as people keep buying it and buying it and buying it to try to get access to it first. Take your time, do your math. But yeah, I think the network's moving along well. I think the upcoming changes to the FTSO system, as far as rewards and things, will be good for providing stability in that sector. I think the launch of F-assets coming up is going to be well timed. And assuming that that goes well and that people enjoy the process and actually bring on liquidity, I think that's going to expand as quickly as it can. It's really just a question of do current Flare network users have liquidity on XRP, on the Bitcoin network, and on the Doge network that they want to bring onto Flare? There's no question that everyone wants that liquidity to come on. It's just, do we have it, and are we the ones that are willing to bring it on? If the current users are not the ones willing to bring it on, it's going to be hard to make the case that others who aren't currently involved in Flare should choose to turn towards Flare with their liquidity and bring that liquidity on if we're all just waiting for it over here. So kind of one of those catch-22s where, you know, take your time, be safe, but also be prepared to actually, you know, do what we've all been waiting for.
Yeah. So you've been talking about F-assets and FTSO upgrades. How are you making use of that in Enosys? Do you have any plans for that?
Yeah, so we'll obviously support F-assets on the DEXs, on anything that we do, really. Having F-assets come on is going to be great. I'm hoping we can get some more details about how those incentive systems are going to work. Originally, there was, I believe, the intention for there to be rewards, sort of like there is for wrapped Flare, where you can delegate. I don't know where that stands right now, or if Flare is going to shift their focus to doing more R Flare type incentive systems. But we stand ready to integrate, you know, any of that comes up with our products, because obviously bringing liquidity on chain is great, but not if you can't use it without, you know, risking some sort of incentive for bringing it on.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking to do that. The FTSO system, I mean, we use the FTSO price feeds for our front end. We don't use them for anything technical currently, other than some ordering stuff on the NFT marketplace on Songbird, which is kind of going through a revamp right now while there's not a lot of activity there. But there's going to be a lot more, you know, need for those price feeds in the future as we bring on assets. So it's going to be exciting to see. Like, everyone's been waiting a long time. I think just a little bit longer, and we'll be there.
Yeah.
So hopefully everyone's not getting too antsy.
Well, I mean, I'm sure someone always is, but you know, I think we've been patient, and I'm hoping that, you know, we can just pull out a little bit more of that patience. Yeah, of course, you can push Flare, but safety, I think, for these kind of things is paramount. And you often, like, for this kind of thing, I think you get like one chance.
Mm-hmm.
So if it goes wrong, you know, it's like you don't have to try again. So yeah, it's very important that they cross all their T's and dot all their I's, as they say. Darren, do you have something that you can show us? Like, I've asked that often of our guests, if they have something that might be interesting to the users to see from your app suite, for instance, or something else.
Yeah, I mean, I can do a brief kind of show through what the V3 DEX looks like, for those that haven't seen it or used it. Let me see if I can get that pulled up. I don't know if you're seeing that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah. So on the V3 DEX, you know, we've got quite a number of pools up on Flare. So some of these are incentivized with Apsis and R Flare, because we built in an incentive system directly into the V3, which is a concentrated liquidity DEX. But we built an incentive system directly into that that allows us to pass incentives on to liquidity providers, which works sort of as a supplemental fee system. Just briefly, the difference between our V2 DEX and our V3 DEX, the V2 DEX is a Uniswap V2 style DEX, which uses a fully bonded liquidity curve, which means your liquidity extends all the way from 0 to infinity. And so every single liquidity position token is the same, and it trades along that curve, which makes for a smooth and predictable trading experience, but it also means you're only utilizing a very, very small portion of the actual liquidity in the pool at one time. A V3 DEX is a concentrated liquidity DEX, in which the user can set their own virtual trading range for the liquidity on the DEX. So you could go in and set a 0 to infinity curve. You could also set a very narrow, say you wanted your Flare and USDC liquidity to trade on a very narrow range from, let's say, 19 or 1.958 cents to 2.129 cents. Then you would put in your liquidity and it would go into that trading range, meaning that all of your liquidity that you put in would be utilized within that range. If Flare falls below this bottom price point that you've set, then you would have fully purchased Flare with the USDC that you put in. If it goes above this higher tick rate price point, then you would have sold all of the Flare that you put in for USDC along that shortened curve. What that does is it allows for much deeper actual trading liquidity per TVL that's put into the system. So rather than needing to put in $1,000 of TVL in order to get $10 of trading liquidity per trade, you could put in $10 and you would get most of that in actual trading liquidity. So in order to incentivize and de-risk more concentrated positions, we built the incentive system, which looks at active liquidity, which is liquidity that's actually being used for trades and therefore gaining fees. And it further incentivizes that liquidity. We do that because the more concentrated your position is, the more risk you're taking on as far as impermanent loss and things like that. You also gain more fees and gain incentives. So it's a risk offset. It's a system that we built that we are using to incentivize. Other projects and builders who wanted to incentivize liquidity could also do that, because we can add as many incentive pools as we want to any particular pair. And then we also have the rFlare incentives that Flare is providing for specific pools at specific rates that they've decided. And that uses a different system. We track it the same way, but those are given out at the end of the month. After we receive the rFlare from Flare, we pass that on to the liquidity providers that have earned it.
So that's not like that's not claimed from the portal. You pass that through, basically.
It's claimed from the portal, but so the way the rFlare system works is basically Flare has said this is what we want to see. So incentivize this specific behavior or this specific goal that we've got. We then pass the data, and so does everyone else who's a part of the system. We pass the data to Flare. They check it. They say okay. They send everybody the rFlare, which we then run a script which passes that on to the end user who's supposed to receive it, and they can then claim it through the portal and then go through the process with rFlare.
Okay, then it's as I'm used to.
Yeah, it's the same. We had hoped when we built the incentive system that it would be something that would be used for that sort of purpose, but then we've got the rFlare system on the side of that as well. But yeah, so you've got your positions, you've got your liquidity, you've got your fees being tracked, you've got all of that. When we run swaps through the V3, it actually goes through a universal router, which finds the best route between two assets. So it's not trading directly on a pool. Like you can't go in and say, hey, I want to trade this on this specific fee tier of this specific LP. That's not something that our UI is going to allow. You can build your own if you want to. But what it does is it looks for the best route through multiple pools to find you the best trade possible using all of the liquidity that's on the DEX. And one of the cool things about that is that it means that specific liquidity for a specific asset is not as important as total liquidity in the system.
Yeah.
Because as long as liquidity is linked through one token, then it can be accessed using any of the others. So even if there was no Flare to S-Flare pool, if Flare was paired to USDT and S-Flare was paired to USDT, you would be able to swap Flare for S-Flare by doing Flare to USDT, USDT to S-Flare.
Yeah. It might theoretically still do that, even though there is a pool, right? Yeah. If it makes more sense.
Yes, if it's a better trade to do that, then it will do it. Or if it's a better trade to take half of it and do that, and half of it swaps directly, then it'll do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean those things kind of combined, I think, sets us up for pretty good growth. We are adding in the very near future APY calculations. We didn't have them on there in the beginning because they're sort of misleading, and we've been trying to find a better way to show the APY, because the issue with showing APYs on a V3 obviously is that everybody's position is fungible or is non-fungible. Every position is different, so everybody's APY is going to be totally different. The amount of fees that you're going to collect per unit of liquidity is different. The amount of incentives that you're going to get per unit of liquidity is different. The fact that you can then shift out of range means that the APY might go to 0 for you because now you're no longer active. Yeah. So there's a lot of kind of issues with trying to show an accurate APY. And so we were collecting data and we were measuring things and trying to figure out a good way to show that wasn't really misleading. But for now, we're going to add an APY estimate that's basically the total TVL with the total rewards. And it's kind of an average APY. So if you were averaging what the total liquidity in the pool itself is doing, and you've got access to the incentives most of the time, then you would kind of expect this just based on the ratio. But obviously, if people are wanting higher fee gain, higher incentives, then you would need to concentrate more and try to stay more within the active range of where trading is actually happening. Yeah, I think that's probably it.
Yeah. As you know, like we've also fought with our APY calculations, and they've been visible. We've been quite transparent about that. It was not that easy. And we also, we are now sort of like estimating based on previous data in the hope that, that's nearby. But, if there's a lot of inflow of Flare, a lot of people buying Flare basically at the central exchanges, then that APR that is the underlying part of the APY is going to change quite dramatically, I think.
Yeah.
So
one of the issues that we were running into is that we were trying to do it on a liquidity basis. It just doesn't scale well on the front end because it's a lot of math that it's trying to do every time somebody pulls up the list of pools that's there, and anytime that liquidity actually shifts, if there's a lot of volatility, it starts to go crazy because things are changing a lot. And you can shift from a point where you've got lots of liquidity to a point on the curve where there's not as much liquidity, and it's got to recalculate everything. And it was just causing a lot of issues a lot of front end scaling issues. But so yeah, we are looking at adding that, but I would just suggest to people that if they're looking at APY numbers, it's a good comparative tool. It's not an accurate like prediction of what you're going to see. It could be more, it could be less, because in a V3 DEX, especially, what you decide to do with your liquidity and how you handle trading in that scenario is going to determine those things. There's a lot of variability there, but if you're trying to look at, okay, what's the difference between this pool and this pool as far as magnitude of what's available, then it's a useful tool.
Yep.
But otherwise, just pay attention and make your own choices. Don't chase yield. You tend to get burned trying to chase yield. But if you're trying to make a choice between two things that you see as being relatively equal, then stuff like that can help.
Yeah, it's an indication, not it's not a promise. Sadly, we can't do that because often the amount of tokens we have for rewards or fees are limited. So yeah, that kind of does it. All right, thank you for the demo. I hope for some people who are looking into getting into liquidity, they can use that background information to make a choice and start slow, as you indicated, which is also not financial advice, obviously. Gotta say that every time. Like that's really a bummer that you can't. People are asking sometimes for advice. It's like, no, I can only give you the facts. I can't tell you what to do.
Yeah, the main piece of advice that I can give you is don't push buttons if you don't know what they do. If you don't really understand what's going to happen when you push that button, don't push it.
It's probably really good advice in general in life, anyway.
Yeah. I give that one a lot. It's usually posthumous advice, unfortunately, where someone has come with like, "Hey, I did this thing, and now I have less money." It's like, well, did you know what that button did when you pushed it? No.
No. It just said get more money here, so I clicked it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, that is, I think, difficult for everybody. And as said, like the fear of missing out is sometimes so great that people are willing to take huge risks. All right, I think we can move on maybe to checking if there are some questions from the audience. They should appear on the screen. There we are. Well,
will we start in that? Yes, there are multiple. There were some on the V2 DEX. There are lots on the V3 DEX. The 0.3% fee ones for those are incentivized. There's also R-Flare incentives available for the 0.05% fee S-Flare to Wrapped Flare LP. So yes, however, we will no longer be starting DEX V2 farm pools. We're letting those expire because the V3 is more efficient when it comes to liquidity and more efficient when it comes to rewarding active liquidity with incentives. So the V2 DEX will always be there if people want to use it. The farms that are there currently are going to be expiring over time. We're just going to let those expire. We're not going to be replacing them. If governance decides to do that at some point, they're welcome to. But as far as we are concerned, the V2 DEX should be phased out in favor of the V3 DEX when it comes to where you're putting your liquidity. You're going to get, if you understand how the V3 DEX works, you have a lot more flexibility. If you don't want the flexibility and you want the same experience as you had on V2, do a full range position. We've got an easy button for that just does full range. You click that, put your liquidity in. Just be aware that you're probably going to receive a smaller share of the incentives than you would have on V2 because there are others who are taking more risks and putting more of their liquidity to work than you are if all you're doing is doing a full range position. And the idea of the V3 DEX is to reward those that are taking the higher risk and putting more liquidity to work. actively.
Yeah. All right. So the short answer is there are tons of S-Flare related pools, and please go check them out. All right. So I guess this is more or less a question for me, but actually it's a question for Flare more than for me. I'm definitely interested in helping with that. I can't make it happen. I have to check with Flare if there are possibilities, if they see possibilities, and if it is an option for them, then I'm definitely for it. I guess we got the same question twice, and you really answered that one already.
Yes, and lots. Go check it out.
This is definitely for you because people know I hold S-Flare.
Yeah, I mean, I have a decent chunk. I usually watch the charts for S-Flare every month, and I trade that that arbitrage opportunity. For some reason, it always trades at a discount on the DEX. I don't really know why. People don't really pay attention to the timings either to realize that there's, you know, a 3 or 4% edge there if you want to pick it up. I'm not sure why that gap is as wide as it is, because there's a decent, like, there's a couple million worth of liquidity between dexes, pairing S-Flare to Wrapped Flare. I don't know why anyone would sell their S-Flare rather than unstake it, but apparently people do. But yes, I definitely hold some, and I have it on our DEX earning our Flare rewards and Apsis rewards. I mean, I have all of my assets are being used somewhere to do something useful on the network. I'm willing to take those risks, even knowing that there's, you know, risks of impermanent loss, risks of having less gains, risks of something going wrong, because why build on a network if you're not going to use it?
Definitely. And I guess like that's also what S-Flare is for, right? It's not necessary. Of course, you can stake it and hold it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's definitely meant to be used. It is a liquid staking token, so you have liquidity afterwards. So, yeah. All right. Okay, maybe one of those is why. What are you going to be doing with F-assets? On which network? So I think the original question was very long, and I sort of like made it shorter because it was asking if you're going to use it on Songbird or on the Flare network.
Yeah, I mean, when F-assets are on Songbird, we'll add them to our DEX there. We've got other assets there. You know, we've got USDT bridged, we've got XTC bridged, we've got ETH bridged. So there's stuff to pair it with there to give you more than just, you know, FXRP paired to SGB. So people have a way on, people have a way off. So yeah, we will be doing that on Songbird. We're looking into being an agent. We may do that, we may not. It'll just depend on what that process looks like to roll into. We are currently engaged in testing for it. So we're definitely helping with the testing there to move things along, because we want to make sure we keep tied in. And then obviously, you know, we do FTSO stuff. So yeah, we'll be engaged with F-assets the whole way through the process. And they'll definitely have their place on any of our products that we can. But hopefully a lot of that gets passed off to governance soon.
All right. All right, this is a long one. All this time, Enosys APY Cloud. I'm not sure what that is, to be honest, but you do. On the Songbird network has been accumulating fees. Can you tell a little more about how these accumulated assets could be distributed?
Yeah, so the APY cloud is actually kind of the it's the reason for our suite to exist as a suite. The way our system works is that a portion of all fees from all of the protocols, so the bridge, the DEXs, the NFT marketplace, the Clover protocol, Hermes for doing the physical NFTs, a portion of the fees from all of that gets funneled into a central aggregator. That central aggregator provides yield to those that participate in governance of our system. So we've been collecting those fees since we launched products. It's always been there in a splitter. They get kind of collected sporadically at this point, but we are finishing up testing for the APY cloud on Coston. We're doing a little bit of fixing on some things that came up with the launch of the V3, because the way fees work is a little bit different there. And so we're fixing some things to integrate that in. And then, yeah, we intend to launch that as soon as we can, and pass off all of the decision-making and all of that to governance holders on Songbird and on Flare. On Songbird, that's the XFi and SFIN token. On Flare, that's the Helion and Apsis token. So we'll be passing all that off as soon as we can. But yeah, the fees have been being collected. It obviously was pretty active in the beginning on Songbird. For the last year or so, I mean, there has not been a lot of volume on anything on Songbird. With the focus shifted to Flare, most of the community has done that as well, which is fine. I mean, if there's not a lot going on that's new on Songbird, there's not a lot of reason to be actively using it. But with F-assets coming, hopefully that, picks back up again. People dip their toes back in to learn what they can about how F-assets work, how they can participate, what the market looks like it's going to do when F-assets launch on Flare, because that's one thing that hopefully people pay attention to, is like, watch what people do with F-assets when they bring them on, because that's going to be a pretty good indicator of what you can expect in the beginning on Flare. But yeah, we have been collecting fees. They are being accumulated. When those start going out, they'll probably go out in the same way that excess distributions for the APY cloud are planned. So a portion of those will be going out each time, because there is a backlog of those rewards. But a lot of that will just kind of depend on timing and what things look like in the current environment at the time.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, I already read no new questions. So I think that was it for the questions. Darren, thank you very much for joining us here. It was really great to have you join us as one of the oldest protocols on Flare. You've been there from the start, as far as I remember. So that's really good to have you here. Just a fun fact today that I picked up on our Telegram. Someone has a used car dealership, and he's accepting payments in S-Flare. So I did not ask him if I could share it, so I'm not naming his name here, but it's always awesome to see if and when DeFi tokens can be used in other situations than on DeFi, than on blockchain. So it's pretty cool. All right.
Well, thanks for the invite, and it was fun talking.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for watching, and I hope to see you all back with the next episode. Thanks.